So the Dungeons and Dragons teams announced last year that they were working on a 3D virtual tabletop. And then at their press event at Gen Con this year, they told us what the name of it was, which they're calling it Project Sigil. And they even demoed it at Gen Con during a D&D live actual play that they hosted with a lot of popular D&D community members who are playing it, like Abria Iyengar as the Dungeon Master. They had Brendan Lee Mulligan and Anjali Bhamani playing, and they even had the voice actors from Baldur's Gate 3, Samantha Bayard and Neil Newman, who played Karlach and Astarion at that game as well too. Now, depending on who you talk to, it wasn't a great experience for people that were in attendance, and there's a number of reasons why that was. There was technical difficulties. Some people didn't realize that it was going to be showing off the virtual tabletop, and so they kind of felt tricked by it. So a lot of different reasons why it didn't have a lot of great reviews for that experience. Then Dungeons and Dragons team also announced that they were going to offer the Project Sigil experience to those who have master tier subscription levels in a beta testing that's going to come out this fall. However, it seems like they're pushing that back because they've said that it's not quite ready for prime time, but they did invite some people to do alpha testing, and I was actually one of those people that were invited, so I got to get an early look and get to have a feel of what that Project Sigil experience is like as a DM and as a player, using a computer and actually interacting with that program as opposed to just watching a video demonstration of it. In that invitation, they did say that they have asked for those who are testing to not share any visual media of the platform. So this video is not going to have any screenshots of Project Sigil from when I was testing it, but I thought I would still share with you some of my thoughts about testing out Project Sigil in this alpha testing. Now, before I go on, I just want to let you know that usually when I have a YouTube video, I also have a written article about that same video in my website, crithitthegiant.com. So if you'd rather read about this than watch this video, I'll put a link to that article in the video description. I also did a video earlier this year about my initial thoughts about Project Sigil when I watched the video that the Dungeons & Dragons team released last year. And so I thought it'd be interesting to kind of compare what my thoughts were then to what my thoughts are now. So if you're interested in watching that, I'll put a link to the video here, somewhere up here, or if it's not up here, it's going to be in the video description. So let me start off with my initial reaction with opening the program. So first of all, just to let you know, it did take me a while to actually get into the program because it has some technical requirements for you to be able to run it. I have a Mac computer and it requires Windows OS, so I had to try to find some creative solutions to actually go in and open the package and be able to run the program. I tried to get a little entry-level laptop to run it, but the graphics was not powerful enough, so I had to get another computer that could run it. So it took me about a week before I can get into it because of the technical requirements. But once I was able to actually open it, for a 3D virtual tabletop, it was actually pretty impressive. I have to say that the graphics was very detailed. The use of navigation for Project Sigil was actually really intuitive, and there's a lot of opportunities to use this beyond the 2D space that we see in a lot of virtual tabletops that you can really utilize. I think the most impressive thing for me about this is just the fact that you can build your own map. It was really easy to build something like pretty quickly from scratch. It's not going to be something that will be like a 5-minute boom type of thing because it just kind of depends on how detailed you want to get with it. But if you want to be able to just like create a floor, you can do that within seconds by, dragging and dropping it into there. You don't have to do it like square by square. You could just kind of create, like click and drag and, cover a whole range of spaces, and then it'll just drop a floor in there. Boom. So it was really impressive as a map building tool. The combat function is actually surprisingly easy as well because you can go right into combat. It will roll initiative for all the characters immediately, and then you can select from your character sheet the kind of attack or kind of ability you want to do. And then if you're attacking a specific person or targeting a specific character, you can click on their mini and then pretty much click to roll the dice, or you can drag it onto the screen to make it feel like you're actually rolling the dice, and the dice will show up on the tabletop as though it's, in the world that you're playing in, and it'll automatically, calculate the roll results. It'll calculate any hit points to take away from the damage. It'll roll the damage dice for you. It's actually really automated for that, and so it can really open up some really interesting opportunities for you to do other things without having to worry about, okay, now I have to go and manually roll the damage dice, I have to manually adjust the hit points, things like that. So if you like an automated experience where you can just say, this is what I want to do, and then the computer takes care of the rest, that is something that it'll do for you. It also has the capability to integrate your character from D&D Beyond. So if you use D&D Beyond and create your characters, there is a way to just import your character sheet that you've already created in D&D Beyond, and it'll pull in all the information about your character regarding, your level, your character's class, race, things like that, the abilities. It seems like it's a very, very easy, seamless integration where you just do a couple of clicks and then you already have your character ready to go to play in that map. So it's definitely a very, very video game kind of feel to it. So if you're someone that really enjoys and is interested in that kind of play for your Dungeons and Dragons experience, I highly recommend checking out Project Sigil to see if it's something that you might be interested in once it releases. But with that being said, even though it has come a long way, it still has a long way to go, to the point that I would be surprised if they released this in the first 2 or even 3 quarters of 2025. There's just a lot of shortcomings that still needs to be worked out for the tool. The map itself doesn't have a great way to measure length when you're building out the map, so it gives you a square plot to work with, but as I'm laying tiles out to make the floor, it doesn't really calculate or tell me like how far across I'm going when I'm measuring feet, and so I kind of have to manually count the squares to get a sense of how long I am building the map. There's no apparent way to snap assets together. So if I create a floor and then put some stuff on top of it, and then I want to move it across the map, there was no way for me to do that, actually. I had to like manually do that individually, and there was no way for me to say like group these things together that at least that I could figure out. I tried to look into the guide and look into different places, and it doesn't seem like it was really intuitive to be able to do that if there is a function. There's no undo feature. There's a lot of times where I messed up on something and I just wanted to hit undo, and it wouldn't allow me to do that. So if I moved the floor over and then I went a little bit too far and would just rather like have it start from the beginning, I couldn't just hit Control Z to be able to undo that. So that is, I think, going to be a really hindrance for people who want to build things, but then when they mess up, they just want to start over at a certain point. So I think that's something that's going to be really, really important for the team to include in there. When a player move their mini, the cool thing about what they have is that as you move your mini, it calculates how far you're going. And so if I take my mini and start dragging across the map, it'll say if I've gone 5 feet or 20 feet or so on. The problem is when you're in combat and you're moving that mini and you decide like, oh, wait, that's not going to work. That's not what I thought was going to happen. And so I need to move it back. It's very easy to forget where your mini started at, and that could affect the entire combat doing that way. So I think what would really help is if when someone's turn has started, that it has like some sort of marker to say this is where they started to begin with. So that way, if you ever need to go back and redo something or decide that you don't want to go in that direction, you know exactly where you started from without losing your spot, so to speak. I also mentioned that it integrates your D&D Beyond character. And I say that, it's really cool that they do that, but there are some things that are still problematic. For example, I imported my level 3 Barbarian Path of the Berserker into the D&D into Project Sigil, and it was actually still missing some key features, or it was hidden to the point that I didn't know where it was at. For example, Path of Berserker has Frenzy Attack. That didn't have an option in there for me to select. There are other abilities that didn't allow me to pick from that level as well too, and so obviously, there are things that are really cool about integrating with D&D Beyond, but they are clearly still needing to work those things out. And again, this is alpha testing, so they're not going to have everything worked out, but that is definitely something that I've noticed that there are a lot of things that are missing, and it's still very basic stuff. So I couldn't figure out like how to pull up any of my other abilities because I think it's not importing all the things in there. I think it's just it looked for like specific things to pull in from your D&D Beyond character sheet. But the biggest concern I do have about using Project Sigil, and I think this is just the case for any tool that you use, is the lack of customization, because the way it's going to be built is it's going to really be based on the foundation of the rules for Dungeons and Dragons. But we know that games in Dungeons and Dragons are very eclectic and unique, and there's a lot of flavor that goes into these things that people would like to have that ability to make those changes to reflect what their characters are doing. So if a character is, worked out with their DM that they want their specific spell to do a different kind of damage or whatever, there wasn't a way to do that, and I just don't see that embedded in the infrastructure for Project Sigil yet. So this is something that I think just really shoehorns everybody to say, if you're going to use Project Sigil, you're pretty much going to use it as is, based on the game rules and how everything is written and coded. Now, if you play the game like that already, like, great, like, you don't have anything to worry about. But if you play in a game where you like to make adjustments on the fly, or make adjustments to your characters or to the rules or things like that, that's going to make things very difficult to use Project Sigil, because there doesn't seem to be a way, at least right now, to be able to make those changes. And there's a lot of different kinds of changes that people make in their games that I just don't see how they can code that into Project Sigil. It's the same issue that Baldur's Gate 3 had. They didn't go up to level 20 for their characters because it's hard to do that in a video game, to allow that sort of versatility that Dungeons and Dragons allows you to do with your imagination. Project Sigil is going to have that same problem too. Now, that said, there are some things in the project notes that does make me feel a little bit hopeful about what they're focusing in on. They did make notes about how they are working to ensure accessibility for those who rely on assistive technologies like screen readers, which should be a priority for them. They really need to make sure that it's as accessible as possible when they release this. They also listed a lot of features that they're still working on, like hardware performance, which I'll talk about that in a second. They did talk about how they're working on character leveling, making minis, the builder mode, action economy, stuff like that. So they've already aware that there are things that they're working on, and they made note of that. So again, this is alpha testing. I'm not expecting everything to be laid out and ready to go because of that, but those are things that I immediately noticed that were going to be problematic, that I hope they really fix and work on as they're continuing to finish out Project Sigil. The other thing I noticed is that initially, Project Sigil seems like it's going to have a barrier of entry that's going to be very high. So as I mentioned in the earlier part of this video, that I had to find the right computer technology requirements to be able to run this platform. Now, they did have a note saying that they were working on trying to make sure that the performance requirements wasn't going to be a barrier as much as possible, and that they're trying to find a way to kind of bridge that gap. And so they talked about, maybe supporting 2D plays for people who don't have that experience, right? But I think this is still what's going to make it very detrimental for people to use this platform for the Dungeons & Dragons play. Right now, the game uses Unreal Engine 5, which is very popular for video games and film production, and it's really impressive. But as I mentioned, it requires a Windows computer with some higher than baseline technology requirements as well, too. So you can't just get like a really cheap laptop and run it, because the graphics might not be high enough to do that. So that is something that I think really needs to be prioritized to reduce the technology requirements, but maintain that fidelity of high quality experience as much as possible. And I know that's a challenge, but I think if they really want this to be successful, that is what they're going to have to do. Especially nowadays, where a lot more people are having, using their smartphones or tablets as a main way of interacting with the digital world space, as opposed to having a laptop. And a lot of people just like to be at a table and have a smaller device as opposed to a clunky laptop to play their game. And so if they don't create this with mobile users in mind, and people who are wanting to use that device because they don't have a higher, performing laptop or desktop, then it's going to leave a lot of people out. And to be honest, if one player at a table can't use it, I don't think the entire table is going to say, well, they're just going to have to, miss out on that thing. They're going to adjust to make sure that everybody has that same experience at the table. So they probably won't even buy into Project Sigil if there's at least one player that doesn't have the minimum technology requirements to make that work. They said that they're going to make a 2D option as well, but let's be honest, that isn't the selling point for Project Sigil, because there's a lot of virtual tabletops that are 2D that have been running for years, that have had things worked out very well, and is able to, quite frankly, perform better as a 2D virtual space than Project Sigil is, based on D&D maps. Like, D&D maps is pretty cool, but it's also not at the high. It's not at the same level as something like Roll20 or Foundry or Albert Rodeo or any of those virtual tabletops. So I think it's smart of them to think about trying to reduce that barrier of entry for their players, but I think trying to create a 2D option just kind of defeats the purpose, because the reason why people might want to use Project Sigil is for the 3D possibility, but if they're only going to be able to use the 2D function of it, there's no reason for them to buy into Project Sigil. So I really think they need to focus in on how to make this into an app that people can use on their tablet or mobile devices to be able to play. So after I looked into Project Sigil and played around with it, here's my thoughts on who is the primary audience and who could be their primary audience as well. At Gen Con, they made it clear that they want this to be something that anybody can play at their table, whether it's in person, online, any of the sort. I think the problem is if you're playing in person, people do not want to have every player and a DM to have their own laptop in front of them and play on a screen when they could do that online. People who are wanting to do it in person want that social and physical interaction with people at the table, that they don't want to have a digital device that separates them, because again, that's what the online experience is like. So there might be people in tables who are going to use those devices, yes, but I don't think that is a big enough market for them. Online play, definitely. I think there are going to be people who are playing online that will see this as a really cool way to be able to provide a really cool Dungeons and Dragons experience. I think professional DMs who will, charge people to play, I think they'll probably, buy into this as well and be able to, elevate their level of play online if they want to do it that way. If they're, again, good with the limitations that it comes with. I do think there is a potential audience that they could tap into, and that is the ever-growing experience of play-by-post Dungeons and Dragons. If you're not familiar with what that is, play-by-post is basically a text version of playing the game. So instead of being online and using audio, video to go through the game, you actually join something like Discord, and everybody just kind of types in what their character would do in response to what's happening in the world around them. So the Dungeon Master will post like, here's the situation, here's what this person said, and then all the players will kind of type what their characters will do, what, combat action they'll do, things like that. It is actually growing in popularity, and a lot of people really like that. I think Project Sigil could actually tap into that market, because there really needs to be a really cool experience for play-by-post that goes beyond just reading a set of text. So I think if Project Sigil is able to integrate like the character or the adventure journal in a sense with what's happening on the screen, and then somebody can go back and read that journal, and as they're reading through it, like they can click on each comment or whatever, as they're reading through it, if it's tied to what's happening in Project Sigil on the virtual tabletop, then that'd be a really cool experience for them to kind of get a better sense of what's happening in the game. So if I had a cleric that casts Guiding Bolt and I get to that part in the journal and I click on that, then it actually demonstrates and shows that in the virtual tabletop as I'm reading through it. So it's kind of like it's almost like a recording of what's happening. So that way, if someone's trying to get caught up, they know what's going on. So I think Project Sigil could tap into that market, and we do very well for that ever-growing format of Dungeons and Dragons. But what's going to make Project Sigil a success really hinges on its pricing model, just like anything else. At the end of the day, the company is a money-making business. They're going to have to make money off of this project. And I know, the majority of the customer base are very trepidatious about this if they're planning on using Project Sigil. There's definitely people that's not going to use anything from Wizards of the Coast, and I totally get that, and that's a separate conversation altogether. But for those who are interested in possibly using this, they're really going to have to be convinced on, is it worth the cost and the price? There's a lot of different ways they can go about this. I can see them doing you can buy, the adventure book and get all the Project Sigil assets to use for free. Or, well, for free, you pay for it, but you use it. You get to have access to it when you buy the book for like maybe additional $5 or $10 fee if you want to use Project Sigil. Or maybe they include it in the price, but they, start charging like $35 for the book as opposed to $30 that it is now. Or they could say, for $5 or $10 a month, you can use up to 150 items in in all of your games that's attributed to your account. And then once you hit that 150, if you want to use different ones, you have to swap them out, right? So you can do that for maybe $10 if you want to have like 400 items to use. You would pay $20 a month for a subscription fee. I think what's going to happen is, and this is a very common practice in businesses, is that they're going to make it really easy and cheap for people to get into it. And then after a few years, they're going to change it to make it difficult for you to leave, but going to charge you more to keep using their services. So Disney Plus is a great example of this, right? When they first announced it, it was like really cheap. I think it was like $5 or $6 a month, and they kept it at that level for like 3 years. And then the following year, they increased the price, and the following year after that, they increased the price again. And then they even started introducing if you want to keep it at that price, then we're going to run ads. Otherwise, you have to pay us more to use a ad-free version of Disney Plus. I think the same thing is going to happen with Project Sigil, personally. I think what's going to happen is they are going to make it easy for you to go in. And so maybe it's like a $5 subscription to use like so many assets. And then after a few years of building up a strong enough base where you've relied on it so much that it's going to be hard for you to leave, that's when they're going to switch to say like now everything's going to be piecemeal and then you're going to have to buy things separately. Or, you can keep the subscription, but then there's going to be different things that are additional costs if you want to go above that limit, or if there are certain things that aren't included in the initial 150 items that you can use in your maps or stuff like that. So I think that's what's going to happen. It's a very common practice, unfortunately, but they have to make it worth the customers, money and value to be able to do that, and then have to really make sure that they don't abuse that trust either, because they're still rebuilding that relationship with their customer base. So the pricing model, is really going to depend on the cost, the access, the quality and quantity of Project Sigil in order to make it work and for it to be successful in the long run. So looking ahead, and my final thoughts about Project Sigil. I think it has potential to be successful. I think what they really need to tap into is making sure that the pricing model is there that really supports customers without them feel like they're being tricked into paying more. But I think that it also does give a really interesting and unique experience, or at least it could. Like I said, there's a lot of things they still need to work out. Me personally, I'm probably not going to use Project Sigil. I am more of somebody that I like to use, more of my imagination and be able to have more flexibility in the moment to say, like, here's what's happening. And so if something were to happen in the game and there's like an issue or something comes up that the players did something creative that now is kind of changes some things, like I want to be able to just say, okay, here's what happens, and not rely on, do I have that ready in Project Sigil in the map function and all that. So, it's also very much a video game experience, and that's another reason why I don't think I'll ever use that, because if I want to play a Dungeons & Dragons video game, I'm going to play Baldur's Gate 3. Dungeons & Dragons with my friends and with all the people I play with, it is a different kind of experience that I want. If I wanted that video game experience, I wouldn't be doing D&D in person or online with other people, right? But again, I may not be their target audience for this. So even though I'm not going to use it, doesn't mean that, people aren't going to use it for that reason. I think there is a audience for it. I think there is a market for it. The online players, I think, would be interested in this. I think if they tap into creating their infrastructure to support play-by-post plays, I think that would be really successful for them, because I think that is something that could really add more support for people who are doing those kinds of ventures. But again, they have to make sure that the project is ready to go out the gate, that it is fully functioning, and that people can access it with the minimum technology requirements and still deliver that high fidelity of quality of the map. Otherwise, if they're requiring people to have certain technical requirements, and if they don't meet it, they're going to have to use the 2D version, I just don't think it's going to work out. I think people are just going to opt into doing a 2D version that will be cheaper for them in the long run, honestly. So I think if they want to make it successful, they need to abandon that idea of making a 2D option and just make sure that it doesn't require, high technology requirements to run the program, and to really look into creating an app experience that people can download the app and be able to play through their mobile device, whether it's a tablet or a phone. So, I'm really interested to see what happens. Like I said, I'm probably not going to play in my games, but I'm going to keep my eye on this. And I think that if you are somebody that is at least interested in a 3D experience that kind of gives that video game feel to it, this is definitely something to check out. And hopefully they'll have this ready, probably by the end of next year. I think if they get it out in Q1 or Q2, I think they might be rushing it because there's still a lot of stuff they have to work on. But if they come out with it by the end of next year or early 2026, my hope is that it'll be ready to go for you all. So that's it. That's my thoughts on Project Sigil. If you have any questions about this or any ideas, definitely leave a comment below, and I look forward to hearing from you all.